Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the annual FEL Priestley Lectures. My name is Markus Stock, and I'm the principal of University College and a professor of German and Medieval Studies. Before we begin, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto and University College operate. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Let me add that University College is aware of its history in the colonial enterprise that had detrimental effects on First Nations. I'd like to alert you to a new element on our UC website, Indigenous at UC. You can review there both the beginning historical documentation of University College's colonial past and its relation to the treaty lands that we're on, and to see how UC is striving to live up to our commitments to respond to the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada today. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the FEL Priestley Memorial Lectures. These lectures honor Professor Priestley, an English professor at University College from 1944 to 1972, and were endowed by a group of his former students. Some of these students are in attendance here tonight, online or in person. Notably Philip Anisman, who led the initiatives to create these lectures. These lecture series have served as a fitting tribute since 1993 and reflects Professor Priestley's broad interest in the history of ideas and his dedication to teaching and scholarship. Recent Priestley lecturers include John Burroughs, Jill Lepore, Lorraine Daston, Glenn Coulthard, Matt Smith, and Sanjay Subramaniam. Tonight's lecture is the first part of a 3-afternoon sequence. Part 2, a conversation between our own distinguished guest, Professor Jordan Abel, and Professor David Chariandy of University of Toronto, will happen tomorrow at the same time in the Clark Reading Room on the 2nd floor of this building. So not in this room, upstairs in the Clark Reading Room. That second day event will also be followed by a reception and a book signing. So please come back for this event, the reception and the book signing. For part 3 of this series, we will return to this space here, the Paul Cadario Conference Center, at the same time on Thursday. Before we begin, some quick housekeeping notes. This is a hybrid event. This lecture is being live recorded and streamed into the ether. For those attending in person, a microphone will be passed around during the Q&A portion after today's lecture. Please raise your hand, and once the moderator calls on you, please wait for the microphone to ask a question. I'm sure you'll all be very eager to engage in discussion after the talk, but please wait for and speak into the microphone in order for our remote audience at home or in their offices to be able to hear your question. For those attending virtually, live closed captioning is available for this event. The option can be turned on by clicking the closed captioning icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. In some newer Zoom screen, sometimes it's at the top, but you'll find it. Please if you're remote, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit your questions, which will be monitored here and brought to our live moderator's attention. I would now like to call upon my colleague, Professor Emily Gilbert, Vice Principal of UC and a professor I was on a leave for a year in Germany, and so these lapses happen all the time. So it's, of course, not the German Studies program, it's the Canadian Studies program and the Department of Geography and Planning to introduce our distinguished speaker. Emily, over to you.
Shorter. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be able to introduce our guest speaker, Jordan Abel, who's giving the FEL Priestley Memorial Lectures in the History of Ideas this year. I'm especially delighted as this fall we're celebrating 50 years of Canadian studies at University College, and the importance of studying this place called Canada, that we call Canada, couldn't be more relevant than it is today. And it's absolutely fitting that we are hosting Jordan in this moment, as he is one of the most influential voices in contemporary Canadian literature and a central figure in conversations about reconciliation, representation, and the future of Indigenous storytelling in Canada. Jordan Abel is a queer NISHGA writer, poet, and academic. He holds a PhD in English from Simon Fraser University and is currently an associate professor in the Department of English and Film Studies at the University of Alberta. His work explores themes of settler colonialism, intergenerational trauma, and Indigenous dispossession from land and memory through innovative and conceptual approaches to literature. His acclaimed poetry collections include, and now I have some props, The Place of Scraps, which came out in 2013, an experimental work that juxtaposes images with cut-up text from the colonial ethnography of Marius Barbeau. It won the Dorothy Livesey Poetry Prize. And in my version, which is the 5th edition, which is unusual for poetry books, let me say, in Canada especially, there is a beautiful quote by Rita Wong at the beginning, which I'd just like to read because Rita was here with us just a few weeks ago for the Mel Watkins lecture. And Rita writes, English litters the sky. So she's writing about this book of poetry. English litters the sky. Its typed letters eventually demolished into illegible insects that flit above archival photo testimony to land/people. A surprising and necessary book of poetry. The Place of Scraps is as humbly unstoppable as the next breath you take in and release back out into the world. Wow. Then there's Uninhabited from 2015, another prop. Another conceptual and experimental work that explores land, language, and colonial displacement. I won't say much more. I think we'll hear a little bit more about this one today. Followed by Injun in 2016, which won the prestigious Griffin Poetry Prize and is a cut-up of 91 Western novels from which the term Injun has been excised, which provides a potent critique of racist representations in Western novels. Most recently, Jordan has published his debut novel, Empty Spaces, 2023, which won the Governor General's Award for English Language Fiction. So yet another one of our biggest awards in Canada, one for poetry, one for memoir. I meant for a novel, pretty fantastic, sorry. Mix up there for this novel. And using hypnotic prose, it interrogates and remixes the colonial archive. In this case, the Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper. I think we'll also hear about this one today, so I'm not going to say too much more. And last but not least, published in the first instance in 2020, we have NISHGA. This is Jordan's memoir, and it blends personal narrative, archival material, and visual elements. It's been celebrated for its deeply personal examination of Indigenous dispossession and the legacy of residential schools. It was re-released this summer, so we're delighted to have its recognition again here this month, with a new introduction by Professor David Chariandy, who was mentioned earlier, who will be in conversation with Jordan tomorrow night about this novel as a jumping off point, I should say, for their conversation. So I'm not going to say any more about that one right now either. You're just going to have to come back tomorrow to our session upstairs. And as Marcus already mentioned, there will be books available for signing. So we get a real sense here of how much impact Jordan has made, and what we should really do now is proceed to hear from him. But as should be already clear, he's a groundbreaking writer whose work consistently challenges colonial narratives, expands the boundaries of genre, and insists on the importance of land for healing the violence of settler colonialism. I couldn't be happier than to welcome him here today. And now, Jordan, over to you.
Oh, thank you for that beautiful introduction. And thank you all for being here and for welcoming me into this space. I am really deeply delighted to be here. And to share this work with you. So I feel like I want to start off with a joke. Are you into that? Okay. So this image up here is a CAPTCHA. Click just click the images that have my hair in them. I feel like, you can all pretend not to be robots or something today. um, I yeah I So I'm going to be doing these 3 lectures. One of them is a conversation with David. 2 of them are kind of artist talks and reflections on my work. The thing I'm going to be talking to you today, I've I titled the talk "Red Research Creation and the Textual Contours of Land," and mostly I'm going to be talking to you about uh, empty spaces, and also my second book, Uninhabited, which Emily has uh, shared a copy. uh, so I guess I think the very best way to start out this talk is actually just by sharing a little bit of empty spaces with you and just reading from it before I describe it. Um, so I'm going to do that. A deep, narrow chasm, black rocks. The river lies still on those black rocks. A mile above, there is a tumbling. There is a moment. At this very moment, there is a tumbling in the air a mile above us that runs straight through the open heavens and into some other place. A deep hollow, no shape, no consistency, no breaking some 100 feet in the air. Some places are softer than others, some 100 feet up in the air. Some right angles enter into narrow passageways, and some right angles break off a mile in the air above us. These rocks are full of cracks. Water has worked through some deep hollows, breaking here, wearing there, breaking and wearing until the chasm separates into 2 caverns. Some 100 feet in the air, there is no danger. There is scattered driftwood and the scent of roses. There are glimpses of roses and rocks and shrubs in the spring rain. There is a steep, rugged ascent, a path that winds among the black rocks and trees. Somewhere in the air, there is the scent of roses. Somewhere out there is the wilderness. A reasonable distance through scenes of greenery and nature and glimpses of mountain ranges that disappear just as suddenly as they appear. Among the rocks and trees, there are mounds of earth and other rocks and other driftwood. Somewhere there is an islet and another islet and a clear sheet of water and bald rocks just beneath the surface. There are forests and straits and islets and rocks, and somewhere in the air is the scent of roses. There are crevices and fissures and rocks. The rocks surround themselves with other rocks, although there are sometimes mounds of earth in between. On the shore, there are fragments of rocks. In the deeper parts of the river, there is more tumbling. At this very moment, the river pours into a wide fissure where it just becomes more water between rocks. Between the broken rocks and the deep, roaring cavern, there's a scent of roses and driftwood and trees. There is light. There are straight, naked rocks and immovable trees. There are woods and rivers, and the bed of this particular river is ragged with rocks and intersecting ravines that cut silently across the water above. Somewhere in the air is the scent of roses. The woods are full of sounds and rocks and trees. The woods are full. The upper air, where it drifts over the tops of trees, is full of sounds. Just where it breaks over the tops of trees, there are slow, intermingling drifts of sounds and scents that brush over the clearing some 100 feet up in the air. Rocks and logs and mounds of earth and narrow fissures and bottomland and little ponds and pouring rain and a brook that shoots through the narrow fissures, spreading through moment after moment of stretched light. There is a bellowing in the passageways between the rocks. There are moments of admonished madness. There are moments spreading over the acres of bottomland. There are precipices and adjacent lakes and headwaters. There is a fierceness here that floats through the waters. These rivers are full to the brim. These waters stream down to our feet. In 6 hours, these waters will rush in, and in another 6 hours, these waters will rush out. Salt grows in this water. The water in the woods and on the lakes and in the higher parts of the sea, stretching out horizontally until the current flows upward like blood at the throat. On these waters, the edges touch the shores and the dirt paths trace back to the streams. In the short distance between the water and the black rocks, there is a deep shadow. The breath of the stream, the glancing waters, the throat of the river, these woods are full. Gliding above, somewhere up in the impenetrable darkness, is the scent of roses. Somewhere there is the sound of rushing waters ringing through the deep stillness of the night. The moon rises and the light glances here and there on the water and down to the riverbed. At times, the light hangs in the air on the breath of the river. There are dark waters, there is night. This is the unmingled sweetness of air that sinks into the foaming waters. These are the vaults of forest. There is a stillness here somewhere in the wilderness. There is lightning, and then there is stillness. There are echoes that rush through the forest until they disappear. A mile above, there is a tumbling. In the foaming waters, there is the color of blood gushed from some other place, some other throat, some other softer place. Some waters carry the dead. Somewhere up in the air, there's a scent of roses. Some flames last forever. Some waters thicken with limbs and bodies and trembling voices. Some waters are still. Somewhere in the velocity of the uproar, there is a current of air, an unmingled sweetness that sinks into the forest. The narrow path adjacent to the brook is full of bodies. The blood is natural as water. Glassy mirrors, the sunken hillsides, the shores, the black rocks between the mounds of earth, the glittering stars, the open air floating over the forest, the warm spring wind. In the valley, the stream overflows onto the banks. Here, the tumbling water washes bones, and the waters of the river flow into the sea. There is a canopy from the woods spreading over the lake, shadowing a dark current with a deep hue. When the sun is setting, these waters become healing waters, but the sun is not setting, and the current branches silently into the dark parts of the lake. Somewhere in the forest, bark is peeled from a tree. Branches break. For many minutes, there is a struggle and a deep, cool wind. There is a current of air. There is silent motion, plunging and glancing and sweeping over the broken branches. The sound from the rushing waters drifts through the air. There are words and yells and cries as the air flows up from somewhere deep. As the air flows up from somewhere in the deep, narrow ravine, there is silence again, with the exception of the sounds that come from the rushing water. So this work, which I will pause there, and in case you're wondering, that's what the rest of the book sounds like. There's just 65,000 more words of that. You're welcome. So this book, it arises out of many different conversations and questions. And amongst those questions, uh, uh, many of these questions were also at the beginning of my book, NISHGA, which I will talk about in a couple of days. But the questions are: what does it mean to be an urban Indigenous person? What does it mean to be dispossessed from the Nisga'a community of Ginglox, which is the community that my grandparents are from, which is also a place called Kincolith? What does it mean to be an intergenerational survivor of residential schools? And yeah, so my work in Empty Spaces continues to ask these questions that began in NISHGA, but it also asks, how might I begin to talk about a place that I've been severed from? How do I write about a place that has been taken from me and my family? How do I begin to repair my relationship with lands that I've been dispossessed from? And what does it mean to rebuild a relationship with the land when it's not possible to return to that land? And also, how do I talk about the land without centering my own human ways of knowing and understanding? All of these questions, as well as others, inform what this work is and how it operates. Uh, I, it's also not the first time that I have asked questions about the land in my artistic practice. Um, so here's where I'll show you some of Uninhabited. So in 2014, I published an artist book called Uninhabited. It was co-published by Talon Books and Project Space Press. And at that time, I was working with a corpus of texts from the public domain that consisted of 91 Western novels. Those novels included books by Andy Adams, B.M. Bauer, Zane Grey, Max Brand, Owen Wister, and many others. And they had titles like Tales of the Lonely Trails, The Rangeland Avenger, Early Avenger, Lonesome Land, and The Good Indian. In Uninhabited, the central questions I was working with were about ownership, belonging, and extraction. I was very interested in thinking about how one might digitally manipulate a corpus of texts and how the land might be articulated through the materiality of text. As you can see from these 3 pages from Uninhabited, the text here is part of a landform. The text extends infinitely beyond the boundaries of the page. I was interested in how one might imagine the corpus of text as a landform that can be occupied and extracted from, how it might be mapped and plotted, and the resulting book, Uninhabited, has gone on to become, without a doubt, my least popular book. My partner Chelsea calls it my unloved middle child. And actually, here's not a part of my notes, but somebody very recently reached out to me, and she sent me this really kind email about Uninhabited, telling me how great it was. And I was like, asking if, she could review it and if others, would be interested, like maybe could review it. And I was like, oh, wow, this is so exciting. Nobody ever sends me emails about Uninhabited. And I showed it to my partner, and she was like, oh, this is a scam. She wants you to send her money and copies of your book. So, and I was like, no, she's genuinely interested. she was not genuinely interested. She did want me to send her money. So anyway, I didn't do that. Okay, and so when I think about how Empty Spaces came to be, uh, it's a work that builds on and reconfigures the questions that I began in Uninhabited. How do I engage the land through poetry? How can I communicate my relationship with the land through writing? One of the ways that I think about empty spaces is through structure. In the first chapter of Empty Spaces, I rewrite James Fenimore Cooper's descriptions of landscape from The Last of the Mohicans. So I pulled out all of Cooper's descriptions of land and landscape, and I put them all into a Word document, and I just started writing over them, writing through them, writing beyond them. But in the second chapter of Empty Spaces, I rewrite the first chapter. And in the third chapter of Empty Spaces, I rewrite the second chapter. So Empty Spaces is just, and that goes on and on. So the ending with the 13th chapter, but Empty Spaces is just as much about returning to and circling back around as it is about anything else. When I was in Paris a couple of years ago, just walking around, looking at stuff as one does, and I saw some of these paintings. I was in one of the many museums. I was, yeah, just happened to look up and see Claude Monet's Houses of Parliament series, where Monet paints the scene from his window overlooking the Palace of Westminster over and over again. I think perhaps close to 100 paintings of the same scene in different light at different times of the day, different times of the year. The process of writing Empty Spaces was very similar to this. I would return to the same set of sentences over and over again. When I began writing the second chapter of Empty Spaces, I started out by typing out the last line from chapter 1 and then moved backwards through that chapter until I got to the very first line. That movement sustains this text. The text is always moving both forwards and backwards at the same time. There are always two vectors of writing and rewriting that are moving in opposite directions. In the first chapter, I am rewriting Fenimore Cooper's work. I'm, as I said, writing between and beyond his work. But in the second chapter, I'm rewriting my own work. Each subsequent chapter moves further and further away from Cooper, and the book very quickly becomes a book that is actually about writing and rewriting, where my process is exclusively to rewrite sentences that I've written before. The chapter breaks function as a kind of hinge, a reversal of the vectors of reading. And I will give you an example of that. This is at the end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2. Okay, so here's the last couple of sentences of chapter 1. When there is a moment when bodies can be seen from 100 feet up in the air, when the river breaks, when the air is full of light, when the names of the bodies are swallowed by the forest, when a soft silvery wind rushes through the trees, when tomorrow finally arrives. And then that's the end of chapter 1, beginning of chapter 2. When tomorrow finally arrives, when a soft silvery wind rushes through the branches, when the bodies are swallowed by the forest, when the summer air is warm and broken, when the bodies seem to disappear from 90 feet up in the air, when there is a moment, when the light spreads through the brush, when the sun directly above the earth is blinding, the air and the broken limbs and the silvery clouds and the blood and the rocks and the skulls and the warmth of the afternoon. There is a clear sheet of water and sunken bodies somewhere below the surface. The stars will shine through the clouds, the flesh will fall away, to see the line that connects the antlers to the sternum to the fingers, to puncture the skin, to remove the claws. There is a jawbone resting on the mossy stump of a tree trunk. There is a flat black rock below the thigh and above the skull. There are broken bodies and broken bones. In the river there is blood. Tomorrow is a line that cuts endlessly through the forest. There will be words, there will be voices. Some waters dry up, some waters do not. Some bodies carry the scent of roses. In the summer afternoon, the mud will harden and fall from the dried bones. Bodies in the heat of the afternoon, bodies reflected on the surface of the water, bodies with antlers and mouths and claws and fingers in the hot sun, bodies in the passageways. If there are still passageways between the rocks, if there is a tumbling in the air above us, if the darkness never lifts, if blood gushes from every throat, if some other softer place is not softer at all. And I'll pause there, but there's that point of, yeah, the at the moment of the chapter break, there is a reversal of the directions of reading. So I've tried to think about empty spaces in a few different ways, and one of those ways might be to think of the hauntological dimensions of this text. In Andrew Law's recently defended PhD dissertation, he talks about what he calls conceptual hauntology, and brings together my work alongside books by Norbert C. Phillip, Sid Zulf, and Shane Rhodes. As Law points to in his dissertation, Norbert C. Phillips suggests that we think about her book, Zong, as a work of art that foregrounds spectrality in order to highlight the ways in which those elements of the past are haunted. And through Derrida, according to Peter Buse and Andrew Stott, to think of how the text paradoxically makes its return and its apparitional debut at the same time. The spectral trace of these sentences in empty spaces, echoing across chapters and returning in other forms, other kinds of configurations. According to Mark Fisher, hauntology is rooted in the dual movement of return and inauguration. The structure of empty spaces then may be thought of then as a hauntological one, where the hinge between chapters is not only a place of return and inauguration, but that the spectral influence of the events persists well past its initial occurrence and highlights the temporal tensions about the relationship between past and present injustices. And to read a very bit from the end of the book, which is something that I never do, and I'm really delighted to do here. So empty spaces, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how many people have read this book. It's so hard to tell. But the ending of the book is the same as the beginning of the book. And it's a work that loops back around. And it ends as the book moves forward, there's kind of, there's absolutely an apocalypse that happens in the narrative of this book. So I will. So some of that is present in this ending. And I'm sure you will hear echoes of previous sentences from earlier on. On these waters, the edges touch the shores, and the dirt paths trace back to the soft, bright center of the earth. The breath of the bodies, the glancing eyes, the throat of the highway, these forests are full. Gliding above, somewhere up in the impenetrable light, is the taste of garbage. Air passes from mouth to mouth. There are narrow fissures and a river that flows past the sunken concrete rooftops and tiny bodies in the distance and smashed apartment blocks at the base of the mountain. In the water, there is the color of blood spilled from some other body, some other throat, some other brighter place. Some oceans carry heaps of garbage. Some stretches of highway are broken. Light presses into every corner. There are precipices and paintings of rocks and air sinking into the foaming waters. There is a fierceness here that floats through the swirling debris. In 6 hours, these bodies will intertwine with each other. Bodies suspended in the light. Bodies floating through the forest. Bodies stretching out over the acres of wilderness. Somewhere out there is a broken skylight and glimpses of tangled bodies that disappear just as suddenly as they appear. Among the bright mounds of wet earth and broken rocks and swirling concrete and right angles, the broken bodies surround themselves with memories. Within the light, within the throat of the river, waves within waves within waves. There is a far-off city and burning clouds and ditches radiating light. There are intersecting lines and black rocks in the park and deep, narrow ravines. There is a steep, rugged ascent. Tomorrow is a circle of roses and rocks and shrubs. Tomorrow is filled with burning light and scattered driftwood and the scent of garbage. Some 100 feet in the air is a deep hollow. The rocks are full of cracks. Some right angles enter into narrow passageways, and some right angles break off a mile in the air above us. Some 100 feet up in the air, there are no bodies. Some places are brighter than others. Some things are meant to last forever. Some broken asphalt falls back to the forest. Some broken asphalt falls back to the forest floor. At this very moment, there is a tumbling. There is a tumbling in the air a mile above us that runs straight through the open heavens and into some other brighter place. A deep hollow. There is scattered driftwood and floating chunks of cement and mossy stumps and the taste of light in the air. There is a path that winds around the river, a clear river with black rocks just below the surface. Somewhere there is a river and fragments of rocks. There is light and straight naked rocks and immovable towers. There is a river that is ragged with rocks and floating garbage and broken branches. In the deeper parts of the river, there are crevices and fissures and earth breaking apart. There are black rocks and a deep, narrow chasm. And that's the end of the book. There's more of the talk, but it loops back around to the beginning. Here's another way that I've been thinking about this book. And it is partly through Tennille Campbell's recently defended PhD dissertation called Matriarch Rising, in which she coins the phrase red research creation. And she uses that phrase partly as a way of holding together a coterie of Indigenous writers who include Billy Ray Belcourt, Josh Whitehead, Caitlin Purcell, and myself. But she also uses this phrase, red research creation, as a way to understand Indigenous modes of creative and scholarly production. So while most scholars of research creation are deeply indebted to the Euro-Western philosophies that underpin their work, what Campbell is proposing is a mode of research creation that is more attuned to Indigenous literary and artistic history, kinship, and storytelling. Campbell's work is also an attempt to understand the artistic outputs for Indigenous authors who are operating both within the academy as well as outside of it. Red research creation, then, may be a way to think through how and why empty spaces exist in the world. Empty Spaces is ultimately a work that is about meaningful and pressing questions that get taken up in the area of Indigenous studies, urban Indigenous identity, belonging, dispossession. It's also a work that responds to questions of Indigenous nationalism, Indigenous resurgence, and the importance of traditional Indigenous knowledges, not only in our lives, but also within the academy. If Empty Spaces is taking up these questions, and if we want to call it a work of research creation, what does it mean then that it circulates? What does it mean then that Empty Spaces circulates in different ways, or in what does it mean then that Empty Spaces circulates in ways that are different than the way most research creation circulates? What does it mean that it's a book that's rooted in autobiography as well as conceptual fiction? What does it mean that Empty Spaces circulates mostly outside of Indigenous studies? And maybe a further question could be, how do Indigenous artists and writers approach research creation differently? Is red research creation perhaps a space of decolonization? Can red research creation be a space for Indigenous modes of scholarly and creative production that don't fit easily elsewhere? And, as somebody who's spent my entire life not fitting in to most places, I'm, I mostly mean my work, but also probably myself as well as a person. Um, I feel like the idea of red research creation as a place for Indigenous writers and artists who don't fit easily elsewhere, that gives me hope. So in the mid 2000s, Creek and Cherokee scholar Craig Womack was asked at a conference what he saw as the future of Indigenous literatures. And he simply replied, more and funkier, which I've always thought was really funny. uh, and maybe that's all red research creation needs to be a space for Indigenous projects, scholars, and artists that don't fit easily within other kinds of monodisciplinary logics. I hope that the future of red research creation is one of unwavering hope, where Indigenous artists and scholars create work that is unapologetically radical, that they create works of love and revolution, and that their work resists easy categorization and settler consumption. And I hope that the work of Empty Spaces answers some of these calls. Thank you. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, we can move over there. I'll take some water. Hello? Yeah, cool. I flicked mine on. I pressed the button.
Is it working?
Yeah.
No. Okay,
Yeah.
we got this. All right. Well, thank you so much. That was really wonderful. I love the
Cool.
way that you brought together the reading of your own work with the reflections on it as well. And I think that kind of echoes in the work itself in the books that I have read.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you.
So this is the moment when we do open up to questions from anyone in the room or online. We are monitoring the chat for any online questions. Okay, let's start.
There's a question up here.
Wonderful. Yeah, so we have a mic
Hi.
runner. Thank you so much for running the mic. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for your talk and for sharing your work with us. I asked this question as a civilian. I'm not a literary scholar.
Sure. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it seems like two really present themes in your work. All of your work has land or place on the one hand when you showed us the maps you were creating through
Yeah.
text, but
Yeah.
also identity and questions about identity and urban Indigenous identity seem really important. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why these things seem to always occur in tandem. Like, why can't we think about identity without also talking about land and vice versa, and how that is but at the same time you often sometimes like focus on one or the other in some of your work, but they always come back. These themes always come back and always come back together. So I was just wondering if you could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's really interesting and perceptive. I often think, yeah, this is one of the joys of being a writer and being a creative person, is that I have all this time and space to reflect on the work that I've done and to think about it. Um, and I think the way I would try to answer that question is to say that, especially when I'm starting out a project like Empty Spaces, for example, it's not totally clear to me, like at the outset, exactly what it's going to be or how, like, the kinds of questions it's going to address. And that it's often not until much later on, that I've got a better sense of it. When I first started writing this book, I hadn't clearly articulated those questions, and I kind of, I mean, I knew it was about land in some way, which is maybe very obvious, but I feel like I wasn't sure what the other dimensions would be. And um, as I moved through the writing process, it became, really clear that, you know, um, you know, while all of the writing, on the level of the surface, is about land, that, it is also, it yeah, it's also a text, that, is about, belonging and, severance from land, and also about urban Indigenous identity. uh, and I feel like, all of those, other kinds of, ways of thinking of the text, are, you know underneath the surface in some way. And that all those questions, are all entwined, I think, and they're difficult to, like, even when I try to pull them apart and just, focus on one, the other questions, come with it. So it's very like, I think it's difficult to separate them, and, it's difficult to talk about things, in a vacuum, because all of those, yeah, all of that stuff exists together. Yeah, I don't know if that's, a helpful way of answering your question, but yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, thanks. Oh, Sophie.
Hi, Jordan. It's Sophie McCall. Thank you so much for that beautiful talk. And I just love listening to Empty Spaces. There's just something so musical and powerful about listening to it. So thank you.
Thanks.
And when a while back you shared with me a diagram, like a series of diagrams
Yes.
in the making of Empty Spaces. And one of those diagrams is a Venn diagram. Which I remember from grade 9 science or something. And one is called human, one is called non-human, and one is called land.
Yes.
And the middle piece is we, us.
Yeah.
And listening to you read from Empty Spaces, there were voices, antlers, fingers, breath, arms, that could be land, could be trees, could be humans, could be so I'm just curious, like, where were you going with that? Like, what in writing a novel with that perspective, that very difficult middle perspective of land, of human, non-human, and land, like, why was that something important, and how the heck did you do that? Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I love that question. So yeah, there's a diagram that I don't have with me, but it, yeah, just to repeat it, it's a Venn diagram. There's three overlapping circles, and one of them is it's the title for this diagram is it's about naming the speaker of the text, the we and us, like the pronouns that exist there in the book. And so one of the circles is human, one is non-human, one is land, and I intend to think about the central perspective and speaker of the text, as moving between those three perspectives, and sometimes occupying one more than the other, or shifting, all the time. And to answer the question, I guess I have to say that Empty Spaces, is a work that's really, like it's published as a novel. When you look at the back, above the barcode, it says fiction on it. But truthfully, it is a multi-genre work. It's a work that is indebted to both poetry and fiction. And Uninhabited, is published as poetry, but is built out of fiction. So this relationship between multiple genres is something that I've been working with for a while, and this is partly Empty Spaces is just the other side of the coin, so to speak. And in fiction, in most novels, as most conventional novels, if the novel has a protagonist, which they almost always do, that protagonist, is a character. It has like a, often, even if they're, unreliable, they have got like a, pretty, their character is, it exists and is stable. In poetry, the uh, yeah, the speaker of a poem is not always stable. There's often certain kinds of instabilities or shifts that happen in poetry, where even if the speaker of a poem like uses like a lyric I, it's not always the case that speaker is the same every time, in every line, or like there's shifts that can happen. And so I really took a lot of cues from my interest in poetry in thinking about how the speaker, like if there's a protagonist, in Empty Spaces, which I guess that there is, I that's very informed by the way poetry works, and I think that's really interesting. it's also probably very challenging, you know, to bring that element of poetry into the space of fiction that I think, you know, often doesn't. Yeah, fiction often doesn't go there. um, I think that's the best way I can answer it. You know, as and maybe there is actually maybe there is a further answer, which is to say, you know, the I was really truly interested in trying to write from a perspective that decentered my own human ways of knowing and understanding, and that of course turned out to be a complete impossibility. You know, the way language and thought work, you know, center human ways of knowing. So I, you know, part of the instability, you know, in that narrative voice, you know, comes from having to use, you know, more human ways of knowing and understanding to talk about certain things. Like there's elements in this book that really, you know, are rooted in human ways of doing things. Like there's measurements and there's, uh, descriptions of, I don't know, like feet, other kinds of, you know, like there's descriptions of buildings and paintings. Like there's, yeah, so there's lots of human stuff in the novel that I feel like, you know, at least had to be there in part as a kind of scaffolding to hold up the other parts of it. And you know, when I read from the book and when I think about it, you know, sometime I tried to make the human stuff, you know, disappear as much as I could, which is yeah, that was a challenging thing to do, and you know, and a thing that, you know, didn't work completely. Yeah. Thanks for the question. That was great.
Hi, thank you. Hi,
Hey,
this has been great. Hi, Patricia. So
nice to meet you.
it's nice to meet you. I have your books. I gave one of them to my nephew.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, I know.
That's great.
He's great. He's a good kid. He was like, that's cool. Anyways, it's hard to categorize storytelling as fiction or not fiction, right? Like I think you're working with the
Yes.
idea of storytelling. So that's
Yeah.
I have two questions.
Sure.
One I think is short, which is how is this book about urban Indigenous identity? Like, can you talk a bit more about that? But I think the other question that I'm trying to think about is, you know, you said two things at the end, like that your work and this red Indigenous creation or red research creation is circulating outside of Indigenous studies. Okay, I got
Yeah.
that. And that it resists easy categorization and settler consumption. Right on. Important. So where is it? Where do you want it to circulate? And I want to think about that both in terms of being at the University of Toronto or of Alberta,
Yeah.
and thinking about kind of pushing the envelope on where stuff circulates, and how, you know, as whatever. So where is it circulating? Where do you want it to circulate? Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, so maybe I'll answer the second part first, and I'll move backwards. I have no idea where it's circulating. I don't know who picked up this book or didn't pick it up. You know, I like to think that it's a work that, you know, um, you know, people who are, I mean, like I think it was, I, I think it's circulating partly in Canadian literary spaces, you know, that are maybe interested in the Canadian novel, and I'm not totally sure that makes sense for this work. I'm not sure it doesn't make sense for this work, uh, but I feel like it hasn't totally found its ideal space yet, and I think it's a really you know, I'm biased, but I think it's a cool book that should be read by more people. And I have recently had a number of conversations with people who make music and experimental and ambient kinds of music, because I think they would really enjoy what this book does, and I think it operates, you know, in a way that I think is very similar to ambient music and requires a different kind of listening and attunement, and maybe a different kind of, you know, way of reading and existing with it. So I'm hopeful that, you know, this work, you know, can be taken up in some of those spaces. And, you know, it'd be lovely if it got taken up in Indigenous studies kinds of spaces too. Fingers crossed. You know, the first part of your question, you know, about or the urban Indigenous, like where the urban Indigenous stuff exists in this work. Um, I'll I'll answer as quickly as I can here, but I think that that answer is also within the next talk. But I uh, you know, I talk about this in my book NISHGA, but I, you know, didn't grow up in my home community and was dispossessed from it. So a big part of like me just thinking about urban Indigenous identity is thinking about land that I should be in relation to, and land that I'm, you know, severed from, but, you know, want to connect with. And so a big part of this work for me was thinking about yeah, it was thinking about my grandparents' community in of Ginglox, and thinking about, you know, how I could connect with that land even though, you know, I'm not there. And I'm somewhere else, you know, often in, you know, city kind of, or like urban spaces. And um you know, trying to yeah, trying to think about or trying to use fiction as a way to imagine, you know, a connection to land, or use fiction as a conduit to think through what land is and how to have a relationship with it. So that's where I see the urban Indigenous stuff as being centered. But I'm sure there's other ways to think through that. And also I will expand more on that on Thursday, I think. Yeah. Cool.
There were
Oh,
a couple
another,
questions.
yeah.
There's 3 around here, I think.
Thank you so much, Jordan. That was really beautiful, and I love this book.
Cool.
And I also love the idea of more and funkier as like a vision for the future. Seems great.
Me too.
Why not? I wanted to ask you a little bit about, I think one of the things that research creation has sort of been opening some space for is like a bit more attention to process, like a kind of critical attention to process. And I was thinking, based on Sophie's question about the diagram, and also just sort of like the physical process of cutting up, and then the digital work that you've done, I wonder if you could speak just a little bit to the sort of like, I guess, the materials of your process, or the way that you think of language in a material way.
Yeah, I think, you know, so much of my work, you know, has been about the materiality of text. And I think maybe, you know, that's not quite as present in empty spaces as in other works. But the way that I yeah, the way that I work as a writer is often multimodal. So like I work on a computer like most people, but also I really like to work with my hands, and I yeah, like to work with uh physical and material objects, like books, and to cut them up. And, you know, in particular for my work in empty spaces, or sorry, not empty spaces, uninhabited, and engine, you know, a bunch of my process was you know, taking photocopies of these Western novels, and, you know, taking a pair of scissors and just literally cutting apart those pages, and rearranging the sentences. And then also thinking about, you know, the text as, you know, a material kind of object that could be, you know, carved, or could be shaped in particular kinds of ways. Um, so yeah, I'm often, I often have the impulse to work with text as if it's, not text, and to pay attention, to the to the material qualities of it, which I think, I've never really thought about this process as being all that unusual, but whenever I hang out with writers and also readers, I feel like there are many folks that kind of still consider that process to be kind of like blasphemous a little bit, that they don't want to, they don't want to cut up a book. They the book is a beautiful object that can't be touched, and that is not at all the way I feel about it. Yeah, I wonder, in I guess this isn't quite materiality, but part of the process of empty spaces, was that reversal that happens at the end of each chapter. So there's like oh, I, there's a kind of like I mean, I did it digitally, but it could be, yeah, I can imagine other ways that process could have been more material, and that might have been interesting as well. Yeah, thanks for the question. Oh, there's several more questions over here. I think there may be questions online too. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
So there's
Yeah.
2 in this part of the room, and then we'll go over to you, Siobhan. And
Thank you so much, Jordan. Thank you so much for the beautiful, beautiful talk. It was really wonderful to hear you read.
Cool.
So
Nice.
mesmerizing. The prose is gorgeous. Strange. It's very strange.
Yes, I like that.
I wanted to ask you specifically, I'm really taken by one of the epigraphs for the book.
Mm.
And I just wondered if I could ask you about it and ask you if you could talk about how you think the book is doing what the epigraph says, if that's how it's intended, or what the relationship is.
Yeah.
And specifically the Nixon one, where he asks,
Yeah.
how can we convert into image and narrative the disasters that are slow moving and long in the making, that are anonymous and star nobody, disasters that are attritional and indifferent to the interests of the sensation-driven technologies of our image world. Just a great epigraph,
Yeah.
beautiful, and
Rob
it
makes
really
it.
seems to capture something. I just wonder if you could talk about it.
Sure. I mean, I think this I really love this epigraph. This is from Rob Nixon's book called Slow Violence. I think there's like a number of I think that the work that is in Empty Spaces responds to this, this part of or this quote, in a few different ways. Um, one of those ways, is that I see Empty Spaces as being a really slow moving text that takes a really long time for things that are kind of, I don't know, more monumental to unfold. Like, as I said earlier, there's an apocalypse in this text, and it takes a really long time to get there, and it's one that the kind of, I mean, I yeah, the one of the central parts of the apocalypse that happens in Empty Spaces involves the light, and the light, um, is present throughout the entirety of the book, but it takes on a much different character, I think, in those later sections. And so I think that there's stuff that's happening, early on in the text that's imperceptible, I think, until you arrive at the later parts where you see the whole picture kind of unfolding. So that's one of the ways, and the other way, maybe I really love the really love the anonymous part of Rob Nixon's quote, where he says that these are disasters that are anonymous and that star nobody. And, of course, this is a novel that has, no, or like there's like maybe a protagonist, but it's not like a human protagonist in the same way that other novels have. So I think that's, the anonymity part really spoke to me quite a bit. And yeah, I guess, maybe the last part is to say that, I really was very interested in thinking about time and temporality in this work. And there are, yeah, like I think in any given chapter, or maybe even in any given set of sentences, it's really difficult to say how much time passes. Maybe is, a day or a month or a year or a dozen years. Um, and I found that way of writing to be really interesting and cool. And I feel like, as one moves through this book, it's clear that there's, a passage of maybe hundreds or thousands of years. And, the way that we, as maybe the reader, get that longer picture, is something that I was really hoping to capture. And I'm not totally sure if I was successful in doing so, but that was, part Rob Nixon's work, I think was really inspiring and trying to, you know, attempt to do that. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for thinking so deeply about this work. Yeah.
Great, thanks. I think the microphone's coming over to you, Siobhan. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, we'll come back. We'll come back. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is from David Pedersen. I'm curious to know if you feel that your grandparents' experiences in the residential schools still pose more profound questions for your work. And if so, is there something you're working on that you could share?
Yeah. I mean, I think so in my in my memoir, NISHGA, I write a lot about my grandparents and, my hopes or yeah, my hopes of, or the impossible hope of meeting them and, talking with them and thinking about stuff. I would really hope that they would be into this work and that they would like it and that it would be something that you know would fill them with joy. And also uh you know none of my family uh gets or likes any of my work. So I'm pretty sure that would not happen. I don't know if others are in this situation. I'm so jealous of people who have parents who are like really supportive of their artistic work. Yeah, maybe one day. Maybe if my daughter writes books, I will be, first in line to buy them or something. I hope to carry that forward in the world.
Thank you. I think we had one more question over here. Yeah. And this, I think, will be the last question.
I was going to say, I feel like are we running out of time?
Okay, we got one
Okay,
more
okay,
question.
okay. Yeah. Hey.
Hi. I was wondering about sort of like when you know that you have a draft of work done, how do you know sort of like when to quit kind of and also
Yeah.
at what point in the writing process do you seek feedback from people and who do you seek it from?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question. Um, I mean, if I were to answer honestly, I would say it is different for each project. I think each project requires different kinds of, engagements um, for this one, um, there were several moments So I started this book like 7 or 8 years ago. Like it took a long time, or like it took 7 or 8 years to write it, and it was yeah, it was a process that was very slow, and I started it. I started the process during my PhD, and it took me a long time to figure out how to move it forward. And so I saw it. I you know, at the really early draft stage, I showed some stuff to, you know, my supervisor and my friends, um you know, it was like in a very nascent stage and looked very different than what it looks like now. And I got some feedback, and I felt like it was enough to move forward. But once I got into writing the draft this way, where it was like built out of all these sentences that were about land, um, I think I got maybe like 35,000 words into it, and I had this real moment of pause where uh, I just had this I had this moment where I felt that it was such an ambitious project, and also the text itself was really difficult and required, different kind of way of reading and understanding, and I just had this moment of really profound uncertainty where I wasn't sure, if it would work at all. And so I sent the draft at that point, so like about half of this book, um to like maybe, yeah, 2 or 3 people that I thought would, give me good feedback. And I literally asked them the question, should I keep writing this? And if they had said no, I like to think that I would have listened to them. None of them said no. They all said, yes, I should move it forward. But I really wasn't sure. Like I felt like maybe it was too big, too difficult, too ambitious, too different than other things. Um, and that's, that's been something that I've genuinely struggled with ever since, because I recognize, that all of those things are still true, and that this is, such a challenging book in so many different ways. And that's a tough sell for, lots of people. And also, I do think it's cool, and that sustained me a bit, and allowed me to move forward with it. Um, yeah, I think I think it's really helpful to get feedback at different stages and for different projects. You know, lots of times in other books, I feel like, I've been the feedback has been less necessary than with this one, because I don't think I've ever been at a point other than Empty Spaces where I really felt like I could just walk away from it and, have to turn to something else. Um, yeah, I don't know if that's a helpful answer.
No,
but
totally. Thank you so much.
cool.
Oh, okay, we do, yeah, we can take one more.
One more? Okay.
We'll squeeze
But
in one.
thank you guys for all your questions. This is amazing. I'm, yeah, really delighted
Thank
to
you.
talk with all of you.
Hello. I agree with most of us sitting here that, your reading of the text has been totally poetic and a very mesmerizing kind of experience in
thank you.
itself. I'm an academician. I come from University of Delhi, and I'm visiting Toronto. So I did not want to miss this opportunity to come and
cool.
to, hear you. There has been so much that has been built up through, your responses to the questions here from the House. I think that has covered almost all facets, or the majority of them. I have a very quick question. In continuation to the one asked on the feedback, Jordan, has there been ever a time when you have written your work or for already worked on projects of yours, while they are established, read, you've received the feedback, in your own perspective building that comes, of course, to all of us along the passage of time, our own interactions with a very dynamic environment or a growing environment. Have you ever looked back on any of your works and thought that, yes, though I wrote it this way, it could have been written differently, or what I stood in my perspective at that time, I have come ahead and I have evolved from that. Has there been any such, instance of your own interaction with your own work?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's such a great question. I think about this quite often actually because I told you all earlier that Uninhabited is by far my least popular book, but my most enduringly popular book is my first one. I think The Place of Scraps is a book that people continue to teach and pick up, um, and I'm so grateful that people have done so. And also, when I return to that book, I love it. I think it's an amazing. I really think it's a lovely book, and I'm so happy that people are continuing to engage with it. And also, every time I look at it, I see all of these moments where I feel like I would have written it. I would write it completely differently if I were to write it today. And I think that's really fun and interesting to have that perspective. Like, and I have no desire to rewrite it, but it's interesting to me to encounter all of these like echoes of my past self and ways that I have written in previous moments that I would never return to. And it's really humbling and cool, and I'm yeah, it's a very strange thing, I think, to encounter that. Um, and I did have uh yeah, I have had a goal since 2013 when I published that book, which was only to write stuff that would continue to surprise me in a decade from now. And the Place of Scraps still surprises me. And it's like because of that's also there's also aleatory processes in that book that are really yeah, that catch me off guard still. And I feel like that was the right choice then. And I'm humbled to see it now. So yeah, thank you for that question. And if I were to add one more response, um, the process of writing empty spaces, because it's about rewriting, that turned out to be very like that was a lovely process and really cool, and also that turned out to be really difficult at the editing stage, because there would be sentences from earlier chapters that I would rewrite in later chapters, but that I would still have this relationship with at the editing stage. And so um, I'm deeply grateful to Warren Carreau, who's who edited Empty Spaces and also edited NISHGA. He helped me cut out 10,000 words from this book, and good riddance. Those words sucked. I'm glad they're gone. But that wouldn't have been a process that I'd be able to do by myself. So yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that last question and for all the questions.
Yes, thank you all. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Marcus, you will say some final words.
I always have the honor of saying the last words. So this concludes tonight's lecture. Thank you, Jordan Abel, for bringing your past selves and your present self to us, and your wonderful words and literature. We really appreciate it. Thank you to all of you in the room and online for attending and for your thoughtful questions. I would also like to thank the staff teams at University College for helping us make this lecture series happen, as always. And I hope you will join us again for the next parts of this lecture series. Tomorrow at 4:30 up in the Clark Reading Room, and on Thursday at 4:30. I think you put enough anchors into the conversation already that make us really curious about what's going to happen
Excellent.
tomorrow and on Thursday. So we really look forward to it. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you.